Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video we're going to be making a long grain shooting board. This particular shooting board is a very basic shooting board and it can also be used for cross grain shooting, but I like to use it for edge grain shooting because it just excels at the process. Today for this shooting board we're going to be upscaling some material. I've got an old drawer front here which is a full plank. We're going to be using that for the bed of the shooting board. And I've got an old wooden floorboard here. It's a Jarrah floorboard. I'm going to be using that for preventing the space from trying to warp and as a fence. So because it's going to take quite a bit to actually prepare this as the base and a lot of work to square it up and get it ready, I'm going to do a separate video, and that video will have been released before this one. So if you haven't seen that, please go check that out. So now that we have our board prepared, we have one square edge, one flat face. We obviously need to go ahead and prepare our stock from the Jarrah sleeper that we're going to use as a fence. So depending on what material you're using, the fence can vary in size. I'm going to do it a little bit thicker than my standard material, which is about 19 millimeters, just because that's the thickness of this floorboard that I've got here. So that's what I'm going to work with. You've got to decide how thick your fence is going to be. Now I'm probably going to make this one about 40-50 mil, something like that. So I've got enough material in here to make that. So I'm going to cut this board off here. You saw my video on where I made the bench hook. I'll do that same process here. So we're going to line that up here, use the marking knife, get our width there. Then we're going to come back with the square, and this edge is already relatively flat, so we can use that to square off, and we're going to run right through here, and then that same edge back here we need to square back to. So if you've already made your bench hook, now is a perfect time to use it to chop this to get a nice square cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hand plane this little ridge here off first, and then we'll use that as a reference to mark from. So for this we're going to go back to our number 4 that's been restored from the big box store. And if you can see this there, it's pretty flat. It just needs a little bit more off this edge up here. So we're going to take a marking gauge, then what we're going to do is reference off our flat edge, and we're going to run that line right through. You can run them on the edges as well. And of course on the back side, but the back side one's not going to be quite accurate because we didn't square this off to this side. So I'm going to use the one on the top as my main reference, purely because I know that this edge is square to this. So our fence is now ready, so we need to go ahead and attach that. So I'll bring you in here and I'll show you how we're going to square that to the edge to attach it. I'm going to be using a trick that, if you've seen my bench hook video, the way I attached it was using some double-sided tape, so I'm going to go ahead and use that and then screw the fence in. Now for this particular one I'm going to end up screwing into the fence from underneath, as the Jarrah is a very hard wood. It's going to be better not anchoring it into the pine but anchoring the pine to it. This is a very thin double-sided tape and it's enough to hold it in place until we screw it on, but pressure activates this like most double-sided tapes. It's just a process of putting it on, giving a good push down, and then getting the corner of your knife under it, nicking it, and you lift it. Now, what we want to do is you want to make sure you got it the right way around, and you just gently sit it there, and you want to get your square. Try and square it across the whole length of it. Hold your square and at square, push your fence until it's up against it. As square as you can get it. And push down on it. And now that's going to hold in place while we turn it over and put some screws into it. 5 screws, I think. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's where I'm going to go ahead and put them. And we're going to countersink these. So in order to keep this real board, which is not obviously a man-made material, flat, we're going to use what used to be used back in the day, and that's cleats. Now the whole reason the cleat helps it is because that cleat is flat, it helps and then it's screwed on, it helps to prevent it from cupping. So that's what we're going to put onto this to ensure that we keep the board as flat as possible. So I went ahead and cut these strips off the floorboard that was here, and then cut them to length. So now we've got 6 cleats here. We might only need 5, but I think since I've got 6, I'll put 6 on here. So that's obviously just the same process as we attach the fence, and we'll put them on, obviously, the underside evenly spaced. Now, one question you might be asking is, how did I get all of these, which was 2 strips that I cut off, how did I get them all the same thickness? Well, there's one way you can do it, and if you look just over here, you can see that I put both boards into the vise and obviously plane them together, and that will get you the same thickness on both strips. The other way, which is what I'm going to be using right here, just to demonstrate, is because I had this floorboard here, it was a very even thickness right the way through, and it was a very stable board. So what I haven't touched is these front and back sides, only the sides that I sawed and hand planed to the squareness there. So the thickness of all of these cleats is the exact same thickness as this floorboard that I've used here. And if you're using any dimension timber, it's going to be close enough for this sort of thing to just use the factory thickness that's on them. Even stuff that's been reclaimed, as long as it's not too badly warped, you'll be fine. Now, this floorboard was nice and flat, so I didn't have that problem. So that's how we're going to attach them. We're going to attach them using that thickness, so we know that they're all identical, and that when we've got our cleats on the bottom of this, it's going to sit flat on the surface. So in attaching these cleats, we want to have them fairly evenly spaced. So I'm not really going to measure it because it doesn't matter too much. I'm just going to do it by eye. So there'll be one cleat up by the fence, but it's going to sit back from the fence so we don't screw into those screws that are already there. And we're just going to evenly space the other ones along, and we know we're going to have one right down this far end, pretty much as close to the edge, but not too close to the edge. So I've got this back probably about 1 inch from the edge of the board here, because I don't want to split the board out when attaching it. And got one more cleat here. So eyeballing this is enough, just as long as you've got support right along the entire board. So let's go ahead, we'll get some double-sided tape, get these tacked down, and then we'll screw them into place. For this, because there's so many of them, I'm going to go back to the old battery drill because it's going to take too long to do all this with hand tools. Even though I may like to, there's some processes that you really need to speed up. So the hand drill comes out for this. So for each of these cleats, we're going to put one hole on the middle and one out towards the edge. But maybe half an inch in from the edge. Now that just means that you're supporting it and helping to prevent that bow because it's held in those 3 spots. So, take 2 on that. So a little countersink. We line them up. So now that that's in, I'm going to go ahead and whack these other cleats on. As you can see, this is quite a long shooting board because I've done it for shooting the edges of the long grainer boards. So I wanted to make this long enough that it's able to encompass the longest pieces that I generally use when shooting. This is a little different the way you work this sort of shooting board to your standard shooting board. This is a more traditional shooting board. I believe it's more of an English style shooting board where the bench top is used as your little skate for the edge of your hand plane. So obviously you're coming in here and you're running your hand plane on the bench. So that reference you obviously want right. So you need to regularly check your bench because you want your bench to stay nice and flat for this to actually work properly. There are some other versions that I've seen of this where these cleats that are on the bottom extend out past the edge and you can actually have a little lower skated run actually attached to it. And I know Rex Kruger did that in a recent video of his. So I'll try and leave the link to his video down below so you can check that out as well. So without further ado, let me bring you in here and I'll show you how we can shoot the edge of the long grain of a board. So I've got this piece of pine here. Now the edge of this is square, so obviously you've got to have your end square to your side in order to have the fence work for this. You don't have to push it up against the fence, but when you're hand planing through, you really need that stop to stop the whole load moving. So what I like to do when I'm using one of these style of shooting boards, I like to just put my bench hook in behind it here, and that just means that it can't really move. For today, I'm going to move it up over here just so you guys can see it a little better. So you really just need it to be pushed against a stop so it won't move. It's going to stay flat because we've got our cleats there, so that's not a problem. Now the next thing you'll notice down in here is that this board overhangs the edge. We're not referencing it right on the edge of the board here, we're going to overhang it because we don't need to reference it on this edge here because all we're looking for is for this reference to be right. So with it pushed up against this fence, we know that this is going to sit nice and square and it's not going to be a problem for us. So we can bring our hand plane up to this. And we can hand plane it like this. Now, if you've got a longer board that sits on here, for instance, this piece, you're going to struggle to keep your board straight as you're hand planing through here. You're going to struggle to keep it contacted as you're running all the way around, and it's likely to wobble like this. So, what I picked up from Rex Kruger's video is that as you're coming through, you just follow the hand plane with your hand on the other side. Now that might not be a problem if you're working with larger boards. If you're working with a larger, wider board like this, there's most likely not going to be too many problems. You can just hold it down because you've got more reference up here, that's not going to move around. So I did say we could do the end grain on this sort of shooting board, and that's correct. Now, the way I found this out was from Rex Kruger's recent video, and I'd already planned to do this long grain video. So let me just quickly add that little bit of information that I picked up into this video so you guys can see it for yourself, or you can check his video out from the link below. We want to shoot the edge of that same board that we were doing the edges on, so we've got it nice and square. So as we overhang again, if we overhang here and we run our hand plane right through here, we're going to blast out the back of the end grain here. So you could either turn it over and get that a few passes here first before you come through so you don't blast it out, or so you put a sacrificial fence in here, bring your board up against that, you can overhang it just a couple of millimeters, and then there we go, we've perfectly got it nice and square and shot the edge of this board. So there you have it, folks. As you can see, this simple little jig is actually very beneficial if you're struggling to freehand sharpen the edge of long boards, or you just want to speed it up and have more accuracy within shooting the long grain of your boards. Plus, you can do a little bit of cross grain shooting on the same board, so it may be a good one-size-fits-all sort of shooting board for you in your workshop. So if you like this video and you'd like to check out where I built this nice little bench hook here out of scraps, please check out the video down here. And if you'd like to support me, please consider checking me out on Patreon. Every little bit does help since I'm such a small creator. Bye for now.